KUR, the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR Kutztown. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. My name is Steve Majiri. We have a very special guest today. I came across an article a few weeks ago in a Philadelphia magazine, and it was about a Temple University professor that 40 years ago had broken into an FBI branch office in Media, Pennsylvania, and found a trove of documents that exposed the corruptness of then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and what later became known as the COINTELPRO scandal. And he stayed quiet about it for up until last year, and then he came out about it, and tons of articles have been written about him. There's been a documentary called 1971 that's been released about him, a book called The Burglary that's been published about it, and he's been looked at as someone who a major social activist who really knows that there's corruption in this country, and we need to, if there is, someone needs to be a whistleblower about that. So we have Dr. Rains on the show today. Dr. Rains, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi.
Well, we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Now, you were back in, your friend Bill Davidson had convinced you to do this, to just break into the FBI building, and you were a social activist your whole life. What was the ultimate factor that made you realize that you had to break into the FBI building to expose Hoover's transgressions?
Well, the story of the break-in, which was on March 8th, 1971, really began for me 10 years before, 1961, when I became a freedom rider and was arrested in Little Rock, Arkansas, because I went into the white waiting room with some colored folks. And we were arrested with a charge of a threatened breach of the peace, which was an accurate statement. We did intend to breach that unholy peace of legalized segregation. Well, I was active in the civil rights movement from then on until 1965 or 66. And it became clear that J. Edgar Hoover was not only a racist, but was using his very powerful position in Washington, head of the FBI, to do everything he could to defeat the desegregation, the civil rights movement. He was convinced that Martin Luther King was a communist, and that whole movement was unpatriotic and anti-American. And he used massive surveillance, massive use of informers, infiltrators to try to end that movement. Well, that knowledge we brought forward into the late 1960s, early 1970, when we became active. I became active, my wife became active in the anti-war movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement. And we knew that J. Edgar Hoover was using the same dirty tricks to try to defeat that movement and to take away the voice of dissent. But we had to get documentation. Now, the problem with getting documentation for that kind of effort was that we'd try to get the documents that were in his own handwriting, within the handwriting of the agents of the FBI. The reason we had to do that is instructive, because we didn't want to do it. We knew we put ourselves in great legal jeopardy in doing this. But if we didn't do it, nobody was going to do it. Everybody in Washington, all the people we sent down there, whose job it was to supervise and regulate powerful offices like the FBI and powerful men like J. Edgar Hoover, they were terrified of Hoover, or they were enamored of Hoover. It's hard for folks today to realize that J. Edgar Hoover was probably the most powerful man in Washington for almost 3 or 4 decades, more powerful than presidents. Presidents were afraid of him. Senators, House members were all afraid of him. So there was no proper oversight. There was no regulatory oversight of Hoover and his FBI. That meant that those of us who were just plain common citizens had to do what we did, because if we didn't do it, it wasn't going to get done. That's a description of what led us to March 8th, 1971.
That's That's great because you make a great point. I mean, how there was no organization or anything that really kept overwatch over that until, as a result, after your findings that led to the inception of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And so it was a really great thing that you did. And when Davidson obviously had to pitch the idea to you, he came to you, hey, let's just break into an FBI building. How did he convince you? Or were you already convinced?
Well, no, we weren't. We weren't convinced. We had to be convinced. It was a dangerous action. Potentially could put us in prison for a number of years. So we acted very cautiously. We had learned good burglary skills from the East Coast Conspiracy to Save Lives, which was a group that broke into selective service offices and destroyed their paper files. And most of them were actually priests and nuns. So we had good burglary skills. We knew how to do casing. And we had to case the FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania. It was on the second floor of an apartment house with two more floors above them, full of apartments. So we had to know the nighttime activity of that building, the people living in the apartments, when they came in, if they went out, when they came back, when they turned their lights out, when they got up in the morning, and so on. And we did that. We knew also the activity of the police cars. The FBI office was right across the street from the county courthouse there in Media. We knew what the police activity was like, and we had all of that information available to us, and we still weren't sure that we could get away with it. And we had to be sure that we could get away with it. My wife and I actually had 3 children under 10 at that point in time. So my wife disguised herself as a student from Swarthmore College, as a person interested in future employment in the FBI, called for an appointment to talk about that, and was warmly greeted by the resident agent, who didn't even bother to ask for her last name or for evidence of her identity. She discovered, fascinating as a matter of fact, she discovered that there was no electronic security devices over the doors or windows. That the file cabinets were just normal file cabinets. They had no security locks. And with that information and the other information we got earlier from our casing, we decided that this could be done and we could get away with it and would not get caught. It was only on that basis that we decided to go forward.
I see. So that reconnaissance really was vital in that sense. And you did scout the FBI office for days. How did you pull off the burglary? Like, what was going through your mind? How did you, as a step-by-step process, what was it like when you actually physically did it?
Well, I wasn't one of the 4. There were 8 of us altogether, the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI.
Correct.
4 went inside. I was not one of those. But all of us, of course, were anxious, especially while the burglary was going on. And shortly after that, when we began to sort the documents in a safe house about an hour west of Philadelphia. What really came down very hard was J. Edgar Hoover assigned 200 agents. Yes, I said 200.
Right. 200
agents to try to find us. They flooded the Philadelphia area, especially around the University of Pennsylvania. They were faced with an almost impossible task, even though there were 200 agents. There was no physical evidence left at the scene of the crime. And there was back then, here in Philadelphia, an immense anti-war movement, an immense resistance movement. Thousands and thousands of students and adults were out on the streets and protesting. And all of them were potential suspects for the FBI. And that meant that we could hide, the 8 of us who actually were members of the Citizens Commission, that meant we could hide in plain sight. Just a fish alongside of thousands of other fish swimming in the same ocean. And indeed, that proved to be the case. The FBI never got close to us.
Right, but still with 200 agents searching just all in that area, And for all those years, how did you remain hidden? Did you just stay, go about your lives normally? Were you ever concerned?
Sure. That was the plan of all of us. We would just, after the action itself, after we mailed the files off to the newspapers, we would simply go back to our normal lives. In fact, we wouldn't even see each other again after that for many, many years, and disappear into the everyday life of a very active city and a very active resistance movement.
I see. And so you didn't. There was never a time when you, like you said, you were a father. If you were ever nervous that, like, okay, what could have happened to our children? What if we were caught? What was your plan B in case you were caught?
The worst. Yeah. Well, I have an older brother, Bob, and I did call him without telling him anything, about the details. Just saying that Bonnie and I were going to undertake some political actions that might be that could land us in prison, and asked him if he would be willing to help us raise the kids if we were in prison for a while. And he said yes. Obviously, we couldn't tell him what we were going to do because that would put him in jeopardy if he had to go in front of a grand jury.
Correct. And your wife was behind you at this 100%.
Oh yeah, she was the one who cased the FBI on the inside.
True.
They had a sketch of her. They made a policeman artist made a sketch of her. It wasn't a very good sketch, but Hoover realized that they'd been cased and reportedly shouted at his agents, "Find me that woman." Well, that woman is sitting downstairs right now.
And she's done a great service for her country. And now, like you said, when you found the papers, this is just irrefutable proof that J. Edgar Hoover was overextending his reach of power. What were your first thoughts when your theory became reality? You realized, oh my God, this is true. Like, he's corrupt.
Well, we were delighted, of course, that now we had documents in their own handwriting that proved that Hoover's secret FBI was doing the dirty tricks that we knew all along they were doing, but could not prove. Now we could prove it, and the investigative reporters at the Washington Post and later at NBC News were very active in getting the whole story out, and finally getting out the story of COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program. That was the name of the Dirty Trick Squad. Amongst other things, the COINTEL program targeted Martin Luther King, threatened him with blackmail,
right?
Told him that he should commit suicide
if he didn't expose his extramarital affairs. Yes,
was one of the documents that was released once the COINTELPRO program came under scrutiny.
Right. There was over 1,000 documents, and you did only send them, like you said, to 3 newspapers and 2 politicians. Why only 3? Why such a small number? Why not send it across the country?
Well, we had a backup system. There was a resistance press up in Boston that we also sent the files to. But we needed the prestige of a national newspaper or of a nationally recognized liberal politician. Both politicians turned the files right back to the FBI. The New York Times and the LA Times turned the files back to the FBI. Only the Washington Post finally decided to publish it, and then only after a big fight in the Post itself between the editors, Ben Bradley especially, and the owner, the publisher, Catherine Graham, who at first was advised by her own legal counsel not to publish these files. The Attorney General, John Mitchell, was on the phone all day on the 23rd of March, telling Catherine Graham and the editors that they must not publish this, that this would endanger national security, and so on and so on. But the editors finally won, and the Washington Post published on the 24th of March on their front page the story of the stolen files.
All right, the Washington Post always seems to have a history of that. They exposed, of course, the Watergate scandal, then a very similar scandal, the Pentagon Papers by Daniel Ellsberg. So that's
right. The Pentagon Papers were 3 months after our files came there, and then Watergate came after that. And probably the discussions and debates that took place around our files opened the door towards the Pentagon Papers and later the Watergate scandal.
Right. And now I just have to ask you, your findings, you obviously thought, okay, this is, we have overwhelming evidence that J. Edgar Hoover has stepped over the boundaries. Did those feelings incite a lack of trust for your country?
No, of course not. I mean, the lack of trust of the country would be exhibited by our sitting on our hands and doing nothing. I mean, we had a great deal of trust, obviously, with what the response of the citizens would be if they were given documented evidence for the overreach of invasion of their private lives and their political lives by J. Edgar Hoover. No, it's just the opposite. It was an exhibition, an action that depended upon the patriotic anger of the citizens when they found this out.
And the press. That's the great thing about, journalists. We are the last, Mike's told me that, my producers told me this, we're the last bastion of freedom against tyranny and then, of course, political corruption in the country. And it's great what you've done. Now, the one thing that I would like to wonder, you stayed quiet for 40-something years, and the case was dropped 5 years right after the robbery and when the statute of limitations is passed. Why wait till last year to come out about this, that you were involved?
We didn't know that the 5-year limit. We didn't know. We could have been charged, and J. Edgar Hoover, we found out later through the research done for the book, J. Edgar Hoover wanted the charge to be espionage. And if the Justice Department had agreed with that, espionage has no statute of limitations. But we found out again only later, much later, with Betty Metzger's research, that the Justice Department refused that and charged us only with breaking and entering, plain robbery. So, and yes, that does have a statute of limitation of 5 years, but we couldn't know that until many, many years after the action.
Right, and Hoover knew people, and it was best to stay low for that. Now, since you revealed such a major scandal over one of the most infamous now thanks to that, infamous figures in U.S. history, what do you view yourself as for exposing such a major scandal in the history of this country?
Just citizens doing what sometimes citizens have to do when the folks in Washington don't do what they're supposed to do.
Right, so you're a social activist. How important, how vital do you think that is for a whistleblower like yourself is in this country?
Well, we're always going to need whistleblowers. We needed whistleblowers back then because J. Edgar Hoover was practicing government overreach into our public and political lives. We need whistleblowers today, just like Mr. Snowden has become a whistleblower that we needed when the NSA and the CIA and the FBI post 9/11 have practiced an astonishing overreach of surveillance into our private lives, including, I'm sure, they're listening right now to this radio broadcast.
I'm sure. And another guy, like you said, Edward Snowden, he's a guy who revealed, overreach by government it's basically the same principle. It's government, performing espionage and spying on their citizens. And people they've completely denounced him as a traitor, a dissident. He's now, exiled himself to Russia. What do you view him as?
I think he's a true patriot, standing in the tradition of patriotic and loyal whistleblowers. Democracy needs whistleblowers. People in Washington are afraid of whistleblowers because they like the power they have in Washington, the prestige they have in Washington. Washington is not the United States of America any more than Wall Street is the United States of America. The United States of America are people like you and me, common citizens.
Right. So since you view him as a patriot, do you see yourself as a patriot in a way?
Sure.
I'm sure you would. It's important stuff like this. We need people to do that.
Listeners will think of me that way as well.
We certainly hope so, and I'm sure they do. And now, so another side of this, you teach religion at Temple and the master's program, and a lot of students have talked about how influential you are. You changed sort of their line of thought. What message based off of your experience of what you've seen happen in this country, what message do you want to instill into your grad students' minds about how to view their country and just how to think when it comes to stuff like this?
Well, I urge my students to learn what critical consciousness is all about, how to take information and dig with that information into the ways in which power and privilege try to continue their power and privilege, sometimes through legal ways, sometimes through illegal ways. That is, loyal citizens are suspicious and need to be suspicious of the way power operates, and needs to be very, very cautious when approaching places like Washington or Wall Street, which seem now to be dancing the same dance.
They do. I mean, that's one of my favorite quotes. It's basically, it's questioning everything. And the people think that's nuts and cynical. I disagree. I think that it's, one of my favorite quotes is that intelligence is not believing everything you hear without questioning, but questioning and clarifying everything you think you know. And that's something that just, it harkens back to this. And now, staying on the topic of
your
courses.
You sound like one of my good students.
I would love to take your classes. If I ever, consider grad school, I would love to take one of your classes. But just one thing on your students. I have a quote right from the Compass magazine by one of your students. I won't reveal her name. She says, and I'm quoting right here, "I want you to know that this world is a better place because of you, that I am a better person because of you. I hope that through my life's work, I will pass along the Rainsian appreciation of the human experience that inspires others to create a better future for all living things here on planet Earth." What do you think she means by that?
When I read that,
I'm sure you were. What do you think she means by a Rainsian appreciation of the human experience?
Well, like so many students today, especially the best and the brightest, she had a big struggle against pessimism and cynicism, and I think that cynicism is a self-defeating emotion. It drains energy. It doesn't create energy. Hope is the thing that creates energy, and I think was helpful to her in her struggle against cynicism to return to social activism and the hope that drives that activism.
I see. And do you still participate in social activist regimes now, today?
Oh, sure.
That's great. It's something just like
Occupy movement. That was a great one. That was, and it's still out there. Occupy hasn't gone away. It's just waiting to come back.
We'll have to take a look at it. And just one more thing about Snowden. I forgot to ask this question. With Ellsberg, the Pentagon Papers, Edward Snowden, and then of course other political corruptions. What hook do you see to now, right now, 2015, from what you've seen, from what you've discovered? Do you see any hook to the present?
Well, it reveals the fact that powerful agencies of the government, if allowed to operate secretly and without public supervision, will always practice a kind of mission creep where they become further and further abusive of our First Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights.
All right, and just for everyone to know, the book is called The Burglary, The Discovery of J. Edgar Hoover's Secret FBI, and it's written by Betty Metzger, a former columnist for the Washington Post. And there's also a documentary called 1971 out there if you want to know the true story. And if anyone wants to see the articles, just look up John Raines, and you could find stuff on him in the New York Times and in Philadelphia Magazine. And a truly inspiring story, and it helps me. It really attributes to my beliefs that I fervently believe that there is corruption in the country, and then there's always going to be that in a high-ranking society, and you need people, whistleblowers like Dr. Raines, to reveal that, even if it is through a dubious method. Because one thing is, if he hadn't done this, people would have heralded J. Edgar Hoover as a hero. Yet, thanks to this gave the proof to everyone that, like he said, probably the most powerful man and during the Cold War was corrupt. He's just plain and simple. And thanks to people like him, Dr. Raines, we can all wonder that, okay, we can all at least sleep at night knowing that there are people out there that are corrupt. And if they do commit such acts and transgressions, there are people who will find out and reveal it to the press. And it's just like what we are. And as a journalist, aspiring journalist myself, if I discover something like this, I would want to, send the message to the public, because that's what our job is to do, is to deliver information to the public. And we need to get that, and having someone like him get this information is just really paramount. And I want to, thanks. I take my hat off to Dr. Raines. If I ever find myself taking graduate studies at Temple, I know what class I'm taking. But I just want to say thanks. It's great to be back, first off. Great to be back at the radio station. The internship's going well, and I've pitched this idea to our this story to our executive producer of special projects down at 6ABC, Mr. Royal, and I hope that I'm going to give him a copy of this interview. He asked for it, and maybe he can find a story out of it, and that's great, because this is something a lot of people should hear about. Because it was in the New York Times, it was in multiple magazines, Philadelphia Magazine, yet I couldn't find anything about it on any local television stations, and unless there may be one that I've missed. But it's a story that, it's not just a local story. I think it's a national story, and everyone should look at it because it's a university professor that is basically, and we go to the front page of the article, it says about the man, I'll quote right now, the reality of segregation was wrong, and rather than observe about it from the upper middle class seat of a privilege where he was born, Raines became a social activist, and he remains one to this day. Raines uses his position as an emeritus professor of religion to encourage his students to be curious, think critically, and question everything. And that's something we should learn to do, is to just, as critical thinkers, as young people, to just learn to clarify, because people who've seen a lot and been through a lot, like Dr. Raines, know what they're talking about. And people like him are, very vital to our society's infrastructure. Well, I thank everyone for listening, and stay tuned for more.